I never expected that Tuesday morning to change my life forever. The email from HR seemed routine. Please stop by at 10 a.m. Walking in, I found Nancy from HR sitting with my supervisor, Diane, both wearing grim expressions. Nancy didn't waste time. Annie, you've been using work time to build relationships with clients. You're terminated, effective immediately. I didn't argue or plead. Instead, I felt a calm certainty wash over me. I just grinned and said, "Strongest relationships I've ever built." She had no idea they all signed retention letters. The path that led to that fateful meeting began 8 years earlier when I joined Apex Wealth Management fresh out of business school. With bright eyes and ambitious dreams, I believed I'd found the perfect place to build a career helping people secure their financial futures. Apex managed over $3 billion in assets for high-net-worth clients, a prestigious firm with marble floors and panoramic views of the city skyline. My mentor, Jack Thompson, took me under his wing from day one. A 30-year veteran with silver hair and kind eyes, Jack taught me what business school couldn't. Numbers matter, Annie, but relationships matter more. Never forget the people behind the portfolios. I took his advice to heart, developing a client-centered approach that contrasted with the company's increasingly transaction-focused model. While other advisors pushed products with the highest commissions, I spent hours understanding each client's unique circumstances, goals, and fears. "You're spending too much time hand-holding," my supervisor, Diane Blackwell, often complained. Ambitious and sharp-featured, Diane had clawed her way to management by maximizing short-term profits. She viewed my client-centered approach as inefficient and naive. "Relationships generate long-term value," I'd counter, pointing to my client retention rates, the highest in the firm. Frank Dawson, our CEO, initially seemed impressed by my results. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a politician's smile, Frank had built Apex into a regional powerhouse. "Whatever works," he'd say during quarterly meetings while patting my shoulder. But I noticed his smile never reached his eyes. My client roster grew to include some of Apex's most valuable accounts. Eleanor Montgomery, a 72-year-old widow who inherited $50 million after her husband's manufacturing business sold. The Harrington family, third-generation business owners with $85 million in diversified holdings. Lucas Freeman, a 36-year-old tech entrepreneur who'd recently liquefied $40 million in company shares. I knew their birthdays, their children's names, their passions and worries. When Eleanor's daughter got married, I attended the wedding. When the Harrington's son was diagnosed with leukemia, I researched specialists and connected them with medical resources. When Lucas's startup failed, I listened to him process his grief over lunch meetings that stretched for hours. The first warning signs appeared about 18 months before my termination. Apex began aggressively pushing proprietary investment products with fee structures I found concerning. These new funds carry unnecessary risk for someone in Eleanor's position, I told Diane during a portfolio review. The fees are almost double our traditional recommendations. "This is the new direction," Diane replied coolly. "Frank wants all advisors aligned with company priorities." Then came the monitoring. My calendar suddenly required approval for client meetings. Diane began joining my client calls, interrupting when conversations veered toward personal matters. "We're a financial firm, not a counseling service," she scolded after I spent 20 minutes discussing college options with the Harringtons for their youngest daughter. Jack noticed the changing atmosphere too. "Something's different," he mumbled one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. "The pressure from upstairs. It doesn't feel right." One Monday morning, I arrived early and accidentally received an internal memo meant for directors. My heart nearly stopped as I read, Client Portfolio Restructuring Initiative, Phase 1. Objective, Transition, 75% of managed assets to proprietary vehicles by Q3. Expected revenue increase, 28%. Client resistance management strategies attached. The memo made no mention of client goals, risk tolerance, or fiduciary responsibility. I forwarded it to my personal email before anyone noticed my error, then deleted all traces from the company system. That night, I couldn't sleep. The company I'd devoted my career to was planning to systematically move client assets into high-fee proprietary products, regardless of suitability. People who trusted me with their financial security were about to be exploited. The next morning, Jack looked unusually somber. "Annie," he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Be careful. Watch your clients closely." I nodded, realizing that what I'd found wasn't just an aggressive business strategy. Something fundamentally wrong was happening at Apex Wealth Management, and I was standing directly in its path. The discovery of that internal memo haunted me. Each morning, I'd arrive at my desk earlier, each evening stay later, systematically reviewing client accounts for irregularities. What I found disturbed me profoundly. The Harrington's college savings accounts showed unusual fee withdrawals, categorized as administrative adjustments. Eleanor's conservative bond portfolio had been partially reallocated to Apex's new proprietary growth fund without proper documentation. 3 of Lucas's technology investments had been liquidated and moved into Apex-managed vehicles with significantly higher expense ratios. "This can't be right," I whispered to myself, cross-referencing signed authorization forms with actual transactions. The discrepancies were too consistent to be mistakes. I printed statements, documented timestamps, and photographed screen data with my phone. Each night, I'd transfer these records to an encrypted drive that never left my possession. If something happened to me professionally, I needed evidence of what was occurring. The moral dilemma kept me awake, night after night. My fiduciary duty required acting in clients' best interests, but direct confrontation with management would likely end my career before I could help anyone. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. "Jack, can we grab coffee?" I asked one afternoon, noticing the stress lines deepening around my mentor's eyes. At a cafe 3 blocks from the office, Jack stirred his coffee endlessly, speaking just above a whisper. "The company's changing, Annie. Frank brought in new investors last year. They're demanding 30% returns, minimum. That's not sustainable in this market," I replied, feeling cold despite the warm cafe. "Exactly." Jack glanced around nervously. "They don't care. They want results, period." Last month, I questioned some transactions in the Richardson account. Frank told me to remember my retirement package depends on being a team player. "That sounds like a threat," I said. Jack nodded slowly. It was. "Listen carefully, Annie. I've been noticing patterns in how client funds move between accounts. There's something irregular about the timing, especially with our proprietary funds." I leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "I can't be certain yet." Jack looked genuinely afraid. "But when auditors requested documentation last quarter, Frank personally handled it. That's never happened before." Later that week, I received glowing feedback from the Harringtons about my service, while simultaneously being placed on a performance improvement plan by Diane for inadequate product placement. The contradiction couldn't have been clearer. I began carefully, subtly, warning my closest clients. Not revealing my suspicions directly, but encouraging diversification away from Apex products, suggesting second opinions from independent advisors. "Annie, is everything okay?" Eleanor asked during our monthly review. Her intuition had always been sharp. "I believe in being prudent," I answered carefully. "The market feels uncertain. Having some assets outside any single institution is simply good practice." Samantha Reeves, a colleague I'd known since our training days, cornered me in the parking garage one evening. Petite with a quiet demeanor, she rarely confronted anyone. "Be careful, Annie," she whispered. "Drew Patterson raised concerns about account discrepancies last year. He was fired for performance issues the next week. Now no one in the industry will touch him. They're saying he violated client confidentiality." "Did he?" I asked. Samantha shook her head. "He showed me the same things you're noticing. Something's wrong here, Annie. Really wrong." That night, I made my decision. I couldn't leave my clients unprotected, but direct confrontation would eliminate any chance of helping them. I needed to create a safety net, a way to continue serving them when things imploded. I spent the weekend researching independent advisory regulations and requirements. Monday morning, I began the paperwork to establish my own registered investment advisory firm, separate from my employment at Apex. I used personal savings to pay the licensing fees and compliance costs, setting everything up in preparation for a future I increasingly saw as inevitable. The next week, while reviewing Lucas's quarterly statement, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. His performance report showed consistent 8% gains across his portfolio. However, when I accessed the underlying account data, the actual performance was -2%. The reports were being manipulated. I immediately checked other accounts. The pattern repeated everywhere. Fabricated performance reports masking significant losses in Apex's proprietary funds. Clients weren't just being overcharged, they were being systematically deceived about the actual performance of their investments. This wasn't aggressive business practice. This was fraud. As I stared at the conclusive evidence on my screen, the office door opened. Diane stood there, watching me with narrowed eyes. "Working late again? What are you so interested in?" I closed the screens quickly. "Just preparing for tomorrow's client reviews." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her expression. The clock had started ticking. After discovering the fraudulent performance reports, I knew I needed legal counsel. I called Taylor Wilson, my former law school roommate who specialized in securities law. "This is serious, Annie," Taylor said after I explained what I'd found, carefully omitting specific client details. "If what you're describing is happening, it's not just unethical, it's criminal. Securities fraud carries heavy penalties." "My first priority is protecting my clients," I said. Taylor's voice grew somber. "Document everything, but be careful. Companies facing exposure often look for scapegoats. They'll try to paint you as the problem." That night, I drafted a careful plan for each major client. I couldn't directly tell them their trusted financial institution was potentially engaged in fraud that would violate regulations and company policy. But I could strengthen our relationships and establish legitimate contingency options. I began scheduling in-person reviews with my most significant clients, meetings that would appear routine on paper but would serve dual purposes. Within legitimate discussions about market conditions and portfolio strategies, I wove subtle warnings. The Harrington Family Foundation deserves continuous service, regardless of staffing changes at any firm, I told Alan Harrington during our quarterly meeting. "Have you considered establishing relationships with multiple advisors as a safety precaution?" "Are you leaving Apex?" he asked directly, always perceptive. "I have no plans to leave," I answered truthfully. "But in wealth management, continuity planning is simply good practice." During these meetings, I also introduced the concept of advisor retention letters, legal documents, giving clients the right to continue working with me should I ever establish an independent practice. Such arrangements were standard in the industry when advisors changed firms. This ensures your family maintains consistent guidance regardless of corporate restructuring, I explained to Eleanor during lunch at her favorite restaurant. It simply gives you options, not obligations. You've been worried lately, Eleanor observed, her experienced eyes missing nothing. Is everything all right at Apex? I chose my words with extreme care. Every institution evolves over time. This just ensures your interests remain the priority regardless of corporate direction. One by one, my major clients signed the retention letters. They trusted me, even without knowing the full extent of my concerns. The documents were perfectly legal, though I knew Apex would view them as preparation for client solicitation if discovered. Meanwhile, Diane's surveillance intensified. My emails were audited. Client meetings suddenly had compliance observers attending. My access to certain account functions became restricted, requiring supervisor approval. Your performance metrics are concerning, Diane claimed during my monthly review, despite my client satisfaction scores being the highest in the department. You're spending excessive time on relationship management rather than product positioning. I responded with data. My clients have the lowest complaint rate and highest retention scores in the firm. The approach works. The approach doesn't align with current company objectives, she countered coldly. The following week, 3 of my smaller clients were reassigned to other advisors to balance workloads. Then my assistant was transferred to another department. My client meeting requests began facing delays or denials. I continued building my documentation, cross-referencing actual transactions with client authorizations, capturing screenshots of discrepancies between system data and client reports. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception. Jack watched this unfold with growing concern. They're isolating you, he warned, during a rare moment alone in the break room. I've seen this pattern before. I'm being careful, I assured him. Not careful enough. His voice dropped to a whisper. Frank asked me about your client meetings yesterday. Specifically, if you've been discussing Apex's investment strategies with outside parties. A chill ran through me. What did you tell him? That you're the most ethical advisor I've ever trained. But Annie, he didn't like that answer. Jack looked over his shoulder before continuing. Listen, I've been looking more deeply into those account irregularities. The timing of fund transfers, the movement patterns. I think they're using new client deposits to cover losses in the proprietary funds. A Ponzi scheme? I whispered, horrified. Jack grimaced. Something similar. I can't prove it yet, but I've started gathering data. If I'm right, the break room door opened, and Diane walked in. Productivity meeting in 5 minutes, Annie. Jack, Frank wants to see you upstairs. That was the last normal conversation I ever had with Jack. The next morning, an all-staff email announced his immediate retirement. The official story claimed health concerns, but when I texted him, there was no response. His company phone was already disconnected. When I tried visiting his home that weekend, a neighbor said he'd left for a sudden vacation. His car was gone, mail accumulating. Something was very wrong. I accelerated my preparations, ensuring every client retention letter was properly filed and legally binding. I completed the registration of my independent advisory firm, establishing compliance systems and securing appropriate insurance. What I didn't realize was how quickly things would unravel, or that the company was already planning to eliminate me before I could take any action to protect my clients. The meeting that ended my career at Apex took exactly 12 minutes. Nancy from HR read from a prepared statement, while Diane and Gerald, the company attorney, watched impassively. Investigations have revealed you've been using company time and resources to develop inappropriate personal relationships with clients. Furthermore, you've accessed confidential account information outside your assigned portfolio responsibilities. That's not accurate, I started to explain. Every client interaction has been properly. Gerald raised his hand, cutting me off. This isn't a discussion. Your employment is terminated for cause, effective immediately. You'll be escorted to collect personal belongings, after which you'll surrender your access credentials and leave the premises. I'd like to see the evidence supporting these allegations, I stated calmly. Nancy slid a termination agreement across the table. Sign this releasing all claims against Apex, and you'll receive 4 weeks severance. Otherwise, the company will pursue all available remedies regarding your contract violations. I didn't touch the document. I'll need my attorney to review any agreements before signing. Gerald's expression hardened. Failure to sign immediately will be noted as non-cooperation. So noted, I replied, maintaining eye contact. The security escort to my desk was humiliating. Colleagues watched in shocked silence as I was marched through the office. I was allowed to take only my purse and phone, not even the framed photos on my desk or my personal calendar. Company policy requires all other items be inventoried and forwarded later, the security officer explained mechanically. As the lobby door closed behind me, panic threatened to overwhelm me. 8 years of my professional life had just ended. My reputation was under attack. My clients remained inside a system I now firmly believed was defrauding them. I sat in my car, hands shaking as I called Taylor. They moved faster than we expected, she said, after hearing what happened. Were you given any documents? They wanted me to sign a release for 4 weeks severance. Thank God you didn't, Taylor responded. That would have waived all your rights to contest their actions. What reason did they give for termination? Inappropriate client relationships and unauthorized account access. Taylor's voice turned grim. They're setting you up as the scapegoat. If financial irregularities come to light, they'll claim you were the bad actor. We need to move quickly. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. They're locking down your client files and preparing legal action, claiming you violated non-solicitation agreements. Frank is personally contacting your top clients. Cold fear gripped me. They were moving to isolate my clients before I could reach them. Taylor, they're going after my clients now. What can I do? You have signed retention letters, she reminded me. Those are legal, binding documents. Send formal notifications immediately to all clients who signed. Let them know you've established an independent practice and are available to continue serving them if they choose. I worked frantically from my home office, sending proper legal notifications to every client who had signed a retention letter. The carefully worded documents explained my departure from Apex and offered continuity of service through my newly established firm. Then I waited, desperately hoping the relationships I'd built would prove stronger than whatever narrative Apex was constructing. Eleanor called first. Annie, what on earth is happening? Frank Dawson just called telling me you were terminated for violating company policies and client confidentiality. He said I needed to sign new advisory agreements immediately. Did you sign anything? I asked, trying to keep panic from my voice. Certainly not. I told him I'd need to speak with you first. Annie, please tell me what's going on. I chose my words carefully. Eleanor, I was terminated unexpectedly. I dispute their characterization of events. The retention letter you signed gives you the option to continue working with me independently if you wish. Of course I wish to. I trust you, not some corporate entity. Her voice softened. "You've been worried about something there for months. I could see it. Is it bad, Annie?" "I have serious concerns about certain practices," I admitted. "I'm taking appropriate steps." Within hours, my phone was overwhelmed with client calls. Most expressed confusion and concern. Many mentioned Frank's personal outreach attempting to secure new agreements. Several reported being unable to access their account information online, a troubling development. Then Lucas called, his voice tense. "Annie, something's wrong with my accounts. I tried to make a withdrawal for a property purchase, but the transfer was denied. When I called Apex, they claimed they're conducting a routine security review that's frozen certain transactions temporarily." I felt my stomach drop. "How much were you trying to transfer?" $2 million. "I'm buying commercial property next week and need the funds. The seller won't wait." "Try a smaller amount," I suggested. "See if that works." He called back 20 minutes later. "Even 50,000 is under review. Annie, what's happening to my money?" By midnight, I'd heard from 12 clients facing similar security reviews preventing access to their funds. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. I logged into my secure email to check if any more clients had responded to my notifications. Instead, I found an urgent alert from a banking contact who had helped several clients establish accounts outside Apex. Unusual wire transfer activity detected from Apex master accounts. Multiple large transactions moving to international destinations. Over 28 million moved in past 6 hours. Attached was a screenshot showing transfer authorizations with several client account numbers I recognized. My hands trembled as I realized what was happening. Apex wasn't just blocking withdrawals. They were actively moving client funds offshore. The entire scheme was collapsing, and management was trying to hide assets before authorities could intervene. With shaking fingers, I opened my documentation files and dialed the SEC's fraud hotline. "My name is Annie Winters," I said when an agent answered. "I need to report an emergency regarding approximately $280 million in client assets at immediate risk." By sunrise, I'd spoken with 3 different SEC investigators and scheduled an emergency meeting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I transmitted my complete documentation, including account discrepancies, fabricated performance reports, and evidence of unauthorized transfers. "This is extraordinarily detailed," commented Agent Marcus Randall during our meeting. Tall and serious, he thumbed through my evidence files with methodical precision. "Most whistleblowers have suspicions. You've provided a complete audit trail. I've been documenting irregularities for months," I explained. "But the offshore transfers began only after my termination." A deliberate timeline, his colleague Agent Patricia Clark noted. "They removed you, then accelerated their extraction plan. I hadn't slept in 36 hours, surviving on coffee and fear-induced adrenaline. My primary concern is protecting my clients. Many can't access their funds. Some have critical financial obligations. We're implementing account freezes to prevent further unauthorized transfers," Agent Randall explained. "Unfortunately, that also temporarily prevents legitimate withdrawals until we can separate clean transactions from fraudulent ones." My phone buzzed constantly with frantic client messages. The Harringtons needed tuition money for their son's medical school. Eleanor was trying to complete a significant charitable donation. Lucas faced losing his commercial property deposit. Meanwhile, Apex launched their counterattack against me. A cease and desist letter arrived, claiming I'd violated non-solicitation agreements and misappropriated confidential information. Their attorneys threatened immediate legal action unless I ceased all client communications. Taylor reviewed their claims and snorted. Pure intimidation. Your retention letters were properly executed. They know they're vulnerable and are trying to silence you. Then came the whisper campaign. Industry contacts forwarded me messages being circulated among financial professionals questioning my ethics and competence. Frank gave an interview to a financial news site claiming I was a disgruntled employee making baseless accusations after performance-related termination. The pressure intensified when Apex published a press release stating they were experiencing temporary technical issues with certain account functions, but assuring clients all assets remained completely secure and properly managed. They announced special client meetings to address concerns and correct misinformation being circulated by former employees. My phone rang. It was Eleanor's daughter, Ashley, her voice tight with worry. Mom's in the hospital. Stress-induced heart episode. She saw the news about Apex and collapsed. I rushed to the hospital, sick with guilt. Eleanor lay pale against white sheets, monitoring equipment beeping steadily beside her. "This isn't your fault," she whispered when she saw me. I suspected something wasn't right when Frank called. That man has smile lines, but no laugh lines. Never trust someone like that. I held her thin hand. "I'm fighting for you, Eleanor. For everyone." Her grip tightened. "I know, dear. That's why I signed your letter. I trust you." Leaving the hospital, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Parking garage. Level 3. 10 minutes. Come alone." It was signed simply S. Against better judgment, I went. In the dim concrete structure, Samantha waited beside her car, nervously scanning surroundings. "I can't stay long," she whispered, handing me a USB drive. "They're monitoring employees who had any connection to you. I downloaded this before they restricted access. It's the internal communication about client fund transfers the entire plan, Annie. Frank and the executive team have been running a sophisticated scheme for years." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You're risking everything." Tears filled her eyes. "Remember Carolyn from accounting? She found discrepancies last year, reported them internally. 2 weeks later, car accident. No witnesses." She swallowed hard. Then Jack started asking questions. A chill ran through me. What about Jack? His retirement was forced. He threatened to go to authorities after finding the same things you did. The day after he disappeared, his access credentials were used to authorize massive transfers from 16 major accounts. That's impossible. Jack would never. Exactly. Her expression was grim. Someone used his credentials after he was gone. Annie, I think something happened to him. Something bad. She slid back into her car. I've left my resignation. I'm driving to my sister's in Arizona tonight. Don't contact me until this is over. I clutched the USB drive, its contents potentially the evidence needed to bring down the entire scheme. As I turned to leave, headlights suddenly illuminated the garage level, a black SUV accelerating toward us. "Go!" I shouted to Samantha. Her tires squealed as she sped toward the exit ramp. I ran for the stairwell, hearing car doors slam behind me. Heavy footsteps echoed in the concrete structure as I descended, heart pounding. I didn't look back until I reached the street level, bursting into the safety of public space. That night, I provided the USB drive to the FBI. The contents confirmed our worst fears. Apex had been operating a complex fraud scheme for years, using new client investments to cover losses and fabricating performance reports. The recent mass transfers were the final extraction, moving assets beyond regulatory reach before the scheme collapsed. Most disturbing were emails between Frank and the security director regarding Jack's retirement, including chilling instructions to ensure complete disconnection and secure all potential evidence. Agent Clark's expression darkened as she reviewed the communications. "We're elevating this investigation and adding resources. These messages suggest Mr. Thompson may have been harmed." "Where is Jack now?" I asked, voice breaking. "We've issued alerts and are searching. Meanwhile, you need protection. These individuals have shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths." The next morning, the financial world exploded. Federal agents raided Apex headquarters. Boxes of documents and computers carried out as news cameras rolled. Breaking news alerts announced that approximately $280 million in client assets couldn't be accounted for. Frank appeared briefly outside Apex's building, surrounded by attorneys. To waiting reporters, he declared, "These actions are based on false allegations from a terminated employee seeking revenge. Apex Wealth Management has always operated with complete integrity. We will cooperate fully with authorities to resolve this misunderstanding promptly." Then he looked directly into the cameras, his practiced smile replaced by cold determination. Annie Winters violated her fiduciary responsibilities, breached confidentiality agreements, and is now spreading malicious falsehoods that harm innocent clients. She will be held fully accountable. The public battle lines were drawn. While I had truth on my side, Frank had resources, connections, and a lifetime of manipulating perceptions. As client panic spread and the industry reeled, I wondered if doing the right thing would cost me everything. 3 days after the federal raid on Apex, I received an urgent call from Agent Randall. "We've detained Frank Dawson and 3 executives attempting to board private flights to non-extradition countries. They had forged passports and substantial cash." Relief washed through me. "What about client funds?" "We've frozen all identifiable assets, but significant amounts were transferred through multiple shell companies. Recovery efforts are ongoing." His tone shifted. "There's something else. Diane Blackwell has come forward, offering testimony in exchange for consideration." My breath caught. "What's she saying?" "She wants to meet with you personally. Says there's information only you would understand regarding client accounts and Jack Thompson." The meeting took place at the federal building under strict supervision. Diane looked smaller somehow, her polished exterior crumbling under pressure. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know how far it went," she began without preamble. "Not at first. Frank presented it as aggressive portfolio management. By the time I understood the truth, I was already implicated." "Where's Jack?" I demanded, caring nothing for her justifications. Pain flashed across her face. "I'm sorry, Annie. When Jack discovered the full extent of the fraud, he threatened to go public. Frank made arrangements." My stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" "Security took Jack from his home to a private meeting with Frank. I wasn't there, but," she swallowed hard, "they staged it as a suicide at his lake house. Made it look like he was despondent over investment losses. The room seemed to tilt. Jack kind. Ethical Jack murdered for trying to do the right thing. Frank kept his credentials active," Diane continued. "Used them to authorize major transfers after his death, creating an electronic trail implicating Jack in the fraud." Rage and grief collided inside me. "You knew this, and said nothing." "I was afraid," she whispered. "Frank made it clear anyone breaking ranks would meet the same fate." "Where are the remaining client funds? The ones transferred offshore?" Diane slid a folded paper across the table. "These are the routing details and access protocols. Frank compartmentalized information, but as compliance officer, I had to verify certain processes. This won't recover everything, but it's a start." Agent Clark, who had been silently observing, took the document. This cooperation will be noted, Miss Blackwell, but doesn't guarantee leniency. Your role in this fraud remains significant. As federal officers led Diane away, she paused. Annie, I always resented how clients responded to you. I thought relationships were just manipulation tactics. Now I understand they trusted you because you actually cared. I never did. That evening, I organized an emergency meeting for all affected clients at a hotel conference room. Over 100 anxious people filled the space, many having lost access to life savings or crucial investment funds. I know you're frightened and angry, I began, facing their worried faces. Federal authorities are working to freeze and recover assets. The evidence suggests this was a deliberate, long-running fraud scheme that accelerated when questions were raised. How could this happen? Demanded Alan Harrington, his normally confident voice shaking. Where were the regulators? The compliance systems? The perpetrators created elaborate false documentation, I explained. They manipulated reports, fabricated transactions, and circumvented security protocols. What about our money? Called Lucas. I have obligations that can't wait for investigations to conclude. I took a deep breath. Those who signed retention letters authorizing my independent representation have legal priority in the recovery process. I've established emergency protocols with several banking partners to provide bridge financing secured against verified recoverable assets. The room erupted in questions and concerns. For 3 hours, I addressed individual situations, connecting clients with legal resources, documenting hardship cases for expedited attention, and providing what assurances I could. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor approached, looking frail but determined after her hospital stay. You tried to warn us within the constraints you faced. No one could have done more. I should have seen it sooner, I admitted, the weight of Jack's fate heavy on my heart. You saw it when it mattered, she replied firmly, when everyone else looked away. The next morning, breaking news announced federal indictments against Frank Dawson and 6 Apex executives for securities fraud, wire fraud, and financial institution fraud. The charges mentioned ongoing investigation into the suspicious death of former Apex executive Jack Thompson. As media attention intensified, my phone rang with a blocked number. Annie Winters. Frank's voice was coldly familiar. Impressive performance. You've created quite the spectacle. My hand tightened on the phone. Federal agents know you're calling me, Frank. This conversation is being recorded. He laughed softly. Always the careful one. I underestimated that quality. A mistake I rarely make. What do you want? To offer perspective. This situation will eventually fade from headlines. I have resources beyond what authorities have discovered. People with my connections don't remain in difficult circumstances long. The threat was thinly veiled. You murdered Jack Thompson. A pause. Tragic situation. But proving anything beyond documented investment misconduct will be challenging. Financial cases are complex. Memories fade. Evidence becomes ambiguous. Not this time, I promised. Jack documented everything, just like I did. Another pause. Longer this time. If certain evidence regarding Mr. Thompson's personal matters remained private, arrangements could be made to accelerate recovery of client assets through channels not accessible to authorities. You're suggesting a deal? After everything you've done? I'm offering efficiency. Client interests were always your priority, weren't they? I thought of Jack's kind eyes, his integrity, his decades of honest service, ended by this man's orders. I thought of Eleanor in her hospital bed, the Harringtons facing medical bills without access to their funds, Dozens of lives thrown into chaos by calculated greed. "Here's my counteroffer," I said clearly. "This call is providing evidence of attempted witness tampering to add to your charges. There will be no deals, no arrangements, no escaping what you've done." I could almost hear his smile fade. "You've made a significant miscalculation, Miss Winters." "No, Frank. You did when you thought relationships didn't matter." After ending the call, I immediately contacted Agent Randall, who confirmed the conversation had been monitored. "We've dispatched officers to secure all known associates who might have been enlisted to carry out his implied threats. Your security detail will be doubled." That afternoon, forensic investigators announced they'd found blood evidence and signs of struggle at Jack's lake house, hidden beneath careful cleaning. Frank's private phone records showed location data placing him at the property the night Jack disappeared. The final piece came from Samantha, who had preserved a voicemail from Jack the night before his death. "Sam, I've found definitive proof. The client fund misappropriation goes back 5 years. Frank authorized everything. I'm taking this to the SEC tomorrow morning." As these revelations became public, the case transformed from financial fraud into something far darker. News vans surrounded the federal courthouse where Frank and his co-conspirators were being held pending trial. Standing in my living room watching the coverage, surrounded by case files and client records, I finally allowed myself to weep for Jack, for clients whose trust had been violated, for the years spent believing I was part of something honorable. The system I had dedicated my career to had failed catastrophically. The road to recovery would be long and painful. Yet amid the devastation, something unexpected emerged. Clarity about what truly mattered in financial stewardship, and unshakable determination to rebuild on a stronger foundation. 1 year after the fall of Apex Wealth Management, I stood before the Senate Banking Committee, testifying on regulatory reforms designed to prevent similar frauds. The fundamental breakdown wasn't technological but ethical, I explained to the assembled legislators. Systems detected irregularities, but human guardians chose to ignore warnings. What failed wasn't oversight mechanisms, but the people entrusted with client protection. The Apex case had become one of the most significant financial fraud prosecutions of the decade. Frank Dawson and 4 executives received sentences ranging from 12 to 25 years for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Frank faced additional charges for Jack's murder, with trial pending. Diane received a reduced 5-year sentence for her cooperation, which proved instrumental in recovering substantial client assets. Samantha's testimony and preserved evidence helped prosecutors build an airtight case against the executives. Most importantly for my clients, the retention letters they had signed proved legally binding. The court recognized their right to priority recovery and continuity of service through my independent firm, Winter Financial Partners. Through relentless forensic accounting and international legal pressure, federal authorities ultimately recovered 90% of the misappropriated assets. For hardship cases, clients with immediate medical needs or critical financial obligations, I had arranged emergency bridge financing through partnerships with ethical banking institutions. Eleanor had not only recovered from her health crisis, but had become a powerful advocate for investor protection. She now served on an advisory council for financial regulatory reform, bringing the client perspective to policy discussions. "You transformed a terrible situation into meaningful change," she told me, during a celebration marking the 1-year anniversary of the case resolution. We had gathered at a local community center with dozens of affected clients, now recovering both financially and emotionally. "We all did," I corrected her, looking around at the faces of people who had trusted me through the darkest period. The Harrington's son had completed his first year of medical school, his leukemia in remission. Lucas had eventually secured his commercial property, now housing a thriving business incubator. Across the room, clients who had once faced financial devastation were rebuilding with renewed wisdom. My own firm had grown beyond anything I could have imagined, built entirely on the foundation of genuine relationships and absolute transparency. We had established innovative protection systems, including independent third-party verification of all account activities and client-controlled transaction monitoring. Most meaningful was the Jack Thompson Foundation for Financial Ethics, created to provide educational resources and whistleblower support for financial professionals facing ethical dilemmas. Funded initially by a percentage of my firm's revenue, it had grown through industry contributions and now offered scholarships, training, and legal resources. A memorial garden at the Community Financial Education Center honored Jack's legacy, a peaceful space where the plaque read simply, "Integrity is not measured by rewards, but by what we're willing to sacrifice for what's right." After the anniversary gathering, I returned to my office to find a letter with Arizona postmark. Inside was a brief note from Samantha, "Building a new life. Your courage changed everything." Some good news deserves to be shared in person. Beneath was a photo of Samantha cradling a newborn, her face peaceful at last. The following week, I testified before a congressional committee examining broader financial industry reforms. Lawmakers had invited me as an expert witness based on my experience and the success of my firm's transparent approach. The Apex fraud succeeded because the company deliberately isolated clients from true understanding of their investments, I explained. Financial complexity often masks misconduct. Genuine protection comes from relationships built on clarity, education, and shared purpose. Several major financial institutions had subsequently adopted elements of my transparency model, recognizing that in a post-Apex world, client trust required fundamental reforms. Industry publications that once featured Frank's business insights now analyzed the structural weaknesses his crimes had exposed. That evening, I visited Jack's memorial garden, placing fresh flowers beside his plaque. The spring air carried the scent of new growth, a fitting metaphor for the renewal many had found after devastation. My phone chimed with a message from Agent Randall. "Thought you should know first. International Task Force just secured the final offshore accounts. Remaining client funds being repatriated. Case officially closed." A weight I had carried for 2 years finally lifted. The system had ultimately worked, though not before exacting terrible costs. Jack's sacrifice had not been in vain. My clients had recovered what was rightfully theirs. Those responsible faced justice. In the quiet garden, I reflected on the journey from that fateful HR meeting to this moment of resolution. The termination that was meant to silence me had instead empowered me to protect those who mattered most. The relationships Apex dismissed as inefficient had proven the strongest defense against corruption. When Nancy from HR told me I was fired for client bonding, she never imagined those bonds would ultimately prove unbreakable, becoming the foundation for justice and recovery. When I grinned and mentioned the strongest relationships I've ever built, I couldn't have known how profoundly true those words would become. Financial management isn't ultimately about products, portfolios, or profits. It's about people, their hopes, fears, and futures. True fiduciary responsibility means standing between those people and harm, even at personal cost. Numbers matter, but relationships matter more. Jack had taught me that from the beginning, and his wisdom had saved hundreds from financial ruin. As the garden lights came on in the gathering dusk, I made a silent promise to honor that legacy through every client interaction, every business decision, every reform opportunity. The financial industry could be rebuilt on stronger ethical foundations. Client trust could be restored through genuine service rather than exploitation. The true measure of success isn't assets under management, but lives positively impacted. By that standard, despite everything we had endured, we had ultimately prevailed. Have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing meant risking everything? When have you seen relationships prove more valuable than rules or regulations? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find meaning in this journey from betrayal to justice. Thank you for listening, and may your own financial relationships always be built on the strongest foundations of trust and integrity.